Thank you for that introduction, Pastor. And I would just like to take this time, as you turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14, I'll just take this time to thank you, Pastor Whitmer, and people of Lighthouse for this opportunity. I hold it dear to my heart, and I really love this opportunity that I have, and I hold it precious. And what he said was true. Many of you were teachers, and many of you have helped me out along the way so much. And I constantly think, when I'm in college, I constantly think of this church and everything about it and all the people here, and I just love coming back to it, and I just love this church. I love the people of this church, and I hold it a great honor to be preaching here tonight. Let's look in Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get him into a ship and to go before him unto the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke unto them, and saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Let's pray one more time before we get started. Dear Lord, I just want to come tonight to thank you for this opportunity, Lord. I pray that you would be with us as we look in your word, Lord. And I pray that it be your words that I speak, Lord, and your word that I read from. And I just pray that you would work in your people's lives, Lord, and you would work in their hearts. I just pray that you would be with each member, Lord, give them the things they need to hear, and just be with them as they try to seek to apply them to their lives. Please be with us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'd like to start off telling you guys about a story. This is the story about the storm and how Jesus came to them. I want to talk about a story of a kind of storm I faced a couple days ago. My neighbor came over to work on my car, and my dad called him up, and he said, yeah, I'll come over. And he's like, I got to cut the grass, do all this other stuff first. So me and my dad decided it would be a good idea for me to go over and cut his grass for him. And I was like, yeah, that's great. So I went over, and I cut his grass. It didn't take too long, but then I had to go sweep it. And this I knew was going to be my problem because his grass was pretty tall, and he had a lot of it. So I went to go start sweeping it, and I had already emptied the sweeper out on the riding mower about 3 times now in bags filled with grass. And I was starting to get tired, and all of a sudden, I couldn't drive the tractor anymore. And I was wondering what was going on. I couldn't figure it out. I got off the tractor, and I looked, and the back wheel was about this far off the ground from where it was because there had been so much grass that had built up where the blades were at. So much grass had been built up there that I couldn't even drive the tractor. So I sat there for about, I don't know how long it was probably 30 minutes to an hour, but just pulling grass out. I had the tractor out, I was just pulling grass out, handfuls at a time. By the time I got done, I had a pile of grass about that high. And so I realized that I should have been doing something that entire time. I should have been going and sweeping with the blades on, because if I had the blades on, it would have sent the grass out to the side instead of collecting in there. And so I finished the grass. I made sure I had the blades turned on. And it just reminded me as I read this story about how Peter, when he was walking out to Christ, how he needed to be doing something the entire time. He needed to be looking at Christ the entire time. And just like that tractor, how it built up with grass, he started to build up fears when he saw the waves and the wind. And the fear started to build up, and it became too much. Just like that tractor it was too much grass to be able to drive it anymore. Peter had too much fear in his heart to be able to walk anymore. And just like I had to reach and grab the grass out of the tractor so that it would operate again, Jesus had to reach forth his hand and save Peter And it reminded me of that story. And if we look, we see how this story started off in verse 22 through 24. It says, "And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary." Now we knew these disciples, we knew that most of them were fishermen, and most of them had been on the sea before. And this wasn't even their first storm. It wasn't their first time on the sea, and it wasn't their first storm that they had to deal with. But we see here that this storm was too much for them. They know something here. They know something that we know in our lives, and they knew that there was a limit. They knew that the storm was too powerful for them. And God had sent them a storm that was too powerful for them so that he could show them his power. And they had experienced storms before. They had fought storms, but they knew that this storm was different. They knew that they couldn't overcome this storm. And like I said, God wanted to show his power. God wanted to show his mighty hand by using them in this storm. And it reminds me of many times as we go throughout our lives how we have those storms and how God allows those things in our life. And we think of them as bad things, and we question God, why did he allow those things in our life? But many times we just have to realize that it's just God wanting to show his hand, wanting to show his power in our lives. If we think about it, if we go out and we're a testimony to other people, if we go out to our workplace or to school or anywhere else, when we overcome those storms that God has given us, we think, why are the storms there? They have a purpose. Other people see those storms in our life. And when they oversee that God helped us overcome them, they know that we have the power of God in our lives. They recognize that, man, that was way too hard for them to get over by themselves. There was no way they could have done it by themselves. And those people know that God did something in our lives. He did something powerful. We have this great opportunity to be a testimony just by the storms that God sends our way. And we also see that because of this storm, they were looking for something. They knew they had long given up on themselves to save them from this storm. And we see in verse 25, "And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." Now we think of this, they were looking. We knew they had to be looking. We knew it was an accident that they saw Jesus. They saw this shape, this figure. And how do we see this? Because they said that it was the fourth watch, and we know from the Bible that this is around the time period 3 to 6 a.m. It was nighttime, morning time. It had to be hard to see. I know many of us struggle in the seeing in the dark. Just ask my grandmother. You never want to drive home with her. If she offers to give you guys a ride tonight, I wouldn't go with her. But no, we can't see in the dark. Most of us, I know I have trouble seeing in the dark. And not only was it dark, we know that there was a storm. It was stormy. There was rain. And we all know how tough it is to drive when it's raining real hard. There's a storm. And we're driving. We got the windshield wipers going back and forth. And we even have the lights, and we still can't even see. Imagine how it was for these fishermen. They couldn't see, yet they saw something on the sea. Jesus had shown himself to them. But they couldn't have seen Jesus unless they were looking. So I full-heartedly believe that they were actually looking for something. They had given up on their own power. They had given up on themselves to save themselves, and they were looking for anything to save them. And that's when they saw Jesus. He came at the perfect time. And as a result, we need to be looking for him more than ever, seeking him with all our might when we face these storms. God will always show himself in these storms that we go through. He loves us so much that he would never leave us out in the storms alone to fend for ourselves. But I fear that we need to look for him. We need to look for him with all our hearts when we do face these storms, or else we won't be able to see him. And looking for him doesn't just mean physically with our eyes. We need to be seeking the scriptures and seeking what God has to say. He holds the only keys, the only anchors and truths to facing our storms. We need to be looking to him and reading the scriptures and praying to him that he can help us and guide us. And once God has provided us, once God has guided us and showed us the way through the Bible, we need to live the life that we know to live. So far we've seen the limit and we've seen the love of God, and now we see the life that we ought to have. If you look back at verse 28 with me, it says, And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, Peter, in this time, this was no, easy thing for Peter to say, to call out to God, to Jesus, and to trust that that was Jesus. And not only that, to step out. I'm sure his mind had to be racing. Just like many times when we have to recognize the things that we have to do, when God shows us the way, the first thing we need to make sure we do is the call. We see here in verse 28, Peter made the call when he called out to him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. He made the call. He recognized that it was Christ. He had faith that that was Christ out there, and he made the call to him. And that's what we need to do. We need to recognize we're in the storm, that God has guided us, and that Christ is seeking to help us, and we need to call out to him. And the second thing that we need to do is take that first step of faith. Now, it can be the hardest or the easiest step, depending on how serious we or the situation are. And we just need to make sure that we take that first step of faith. I know many times growing up, we had different things like camp and different serious meetings and stuff like that. And it was just so emotional. It was easy to make that decision. It was easy to take that first step of faith, to trust God with it. And that first step was easy. And now there have been other times where that first step was hard, where you knew it was a serious decision, where you had to pick one way or the other. And in most cases, we know the right thing to do, and we know God's choice. We know that God has a way for us, and we recognize, usually I'd recognize one way is the way and one way is not God's way. But the reason that we still hold on to that way that's not God's way is because God's choice may be taking a step outside of the comfort and safety of the boat. And that is when we need to apply this faith and follow God. When we recognize that all right, God guided me to this choice, and I know I needed to take it, but it's stepping outside the boat. It's stepping onto the storm, into the midst of it. And that's a scary thing sometimes, but it's the thing that we need to trust God with and have faith with God. If everybody would turn over to James chapter 2 with me, I'd like to take a look at a couple verses. James chapter 2. We'll start reading in verse 17. James 2:17. Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. We see here that faith without works is dead, being alone. And then when we look over just a few verses to verse 22, we see, seest thou how faith wrought his works, and by works was faith made perfect. By reading these verses, we can see that the right thing to do is to have faith in God. Not only that, but to follow him with works, to have these works to show that we have faith with God. We know that works are an evidence of faith that we have in God. And many times we want to tell God we have faith. We're going to say, God, I have faith in you, but I don't want to leave the boat. God, I trust you with this, but I don't want to step into the midst of the sea, into the storm. We need to make sure that not only are we saying the words and not only taking that first step of faith, but we're doing the next hardest thing, which are the continuing steps of faith. And we see that in if we turn back to Matthew chapter 14, when Peter took that first step out, and he, in verse 29, then we follow in verse 30, it says, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. We need to make sure that after we take that first step, we need to be taking those continuing steps of faith. When it's at its hardest, when we're least comfortable, we need to make sure we're taking those continuing steps of faith, and that's the hardest thing to do. It's sometimes easy to make that first choice, even if it's hard. The hardest thing to do is to take those continuing steps of faith, to continue trusting God. Because those times, those are the times we'll be tempted to be fearful, and we'll be tempted with fears in our lives. And we see here Peter was built up with these fears. And we see that with a lack of faith comes the abundance of fear with Peter. And I look back to the grass situation, just like the grass built up, and it wouldn't allow the tractor to move anymore. Peter's fears build up, and our fears in the storm build up, whether they be by other trials or other people or whether it be by a sin that we can't overcome by ourselves, those fears build up. And instead of causing us to walk on the water like the faith does, they cause us to sink. And when we allow those fears to build up, when we don't deal with them, when we don't keep our eyes on Jesus, those fears will weigh us down, and they'll send us to the water. And that's exactly what happened to Peter here. He let his fears overcome himself. He let his fears overcome his faith. And we can torment ourselves by how consumed we can become by our fears. But luckily for us, Matthew 14:31 is in the Bible. And let me read that again. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now, if there's anything life teaches us, that it's when we fail, there are consequences. And I know many of us students know that firsthand. When we fail a test, or when we fail something, there are permanent consequences that we have to deal with. Whether if we fail, we get a bad grade in the class, or we can't perform in certain activities or anything like that, or even when our parents see our report cards and we can't do certain things. When we fail, it leaves permanent consequences. And that's one thing that life consistently teaches. And it's one thing we can always rely on, is that by failing, we have these permanent consequences. But that's not the case here. When we fail, all Peter did was look back to Jesus, and he saved him. And he called out to him, and Jesus stretched forth his hand and saved him. And that's what happens to us in our spiritual life. Yes, in our physical life, when we fail, there's permanent consequences. In our spiritual life, it's almost the same way. We still have scars and everything, but when we fail, God is always ready to reach his hand and to bring us up. We'll have those fears that'll come, and sometimes those fears will be too much, and it'll be too much weight on us, and we'll sink. But all we need to do is look back to God, and he'll take us out. He'll take us out of the water, and he'll save us. And he'll bring us back to the boat with the other disciples. So what is it that's holding you back? We've seen so far the limit of ourselves. We've seen the love of Christ, and we've also seen the life of faith. What is it that you're missing? Are you missing the first step of faith? Are you not making that first decision? Are you not choosing God's way? And what is it that's helping you not to choose God's way? What is it that's enabling you? Whether it be another person or a sin or anything like that, we need to put those things aside and always choose God's way and seek God's direction through the Scriptures. If it's not the first step, what is it? Is it that the boat you are in is too comfortable to step out into the storm? Are you living too cushioned of a life too comfortable, too comfortable to be able to walk by strangers or friends at work or friends at school that need the Lord? Are you too comfortable walking by them to even witness to them? Do you not have enough faith to walk out into the storm and to witness to them and to reach them? And if it's not any of those things, is it the continuing steps of faith? Like I said, the continuing steps of faith are sometimes the hardest. And the fears that we have, those are what builds up, and those are what stops us from making those continuing steps of faith. And I just want to encourage you to continue to make those steps of faith, to continue to keep your eyes on Jesus and to look towards him and to seek his direction and seek his help and seek his word. And we see here, verse 32, and when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. We see here that because God always provides a way out. When we're in the storm, he comes to us. When he calls us out of the boat, we are looking to him. He provides a way to walk on the sea, to walk through the storm. And God always provides a way out. Even when we sink, he provides that way out. And because of that, we're to worship him. And we're to always give thanks and reverence to him in anything that we do, because he has enabled us to do those things. I want to read you a verse. You don't have to turn there, in Hebrews 11:6. Hebrews 11:6 says, But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. See here, without faith it is impossible to please God. The one purpose that we were put on this earth to please and to bring honor and glory to God cannot be done without faith. It cannot be done without taking that first step of faith, without taking those continuing steps of faith, without calling out to God when you're sinking. We need this faith in order to please God. And God will reward us if we diligently seek him, if we look to him, just like the disciples looked that night for something to help them. If we're diligently looking for Jesus to help us in our time of need, he will reward us. And it's a great promise that God gives us. And it should be enough for us to never take our eyes off of Jesus, to always make sure we have our eyes on Jesus. Not only will he protect us, but he will reward us. And that's just something I want to encourage you guys with tonight and to challenge you to go out and live, whether, no matter what the situation is or what storm you're facing. I would like to encourage you to look unto Jesus and to have faith and continue in your faith. And let's pray at this time.